Welcome to World True Crime, where we delve into the most mysterious and chilling cases from around the globe. Today, we uncover the twisted tale of the 8-Day Bride, story of a hasty marriage, a secluded cottage, and a love triangle that ended in tragedy. On May 20th, 1947, 22-year-old Christina Kettlewell was found dead just days after her wedding. Was it a tragic accident, a suicide driven by despair, or something far more sinister? Join us as we explore the unsettling events that led to her untimely death and the dark secrets that may still be buried in the shadows. We uncover the story of the 8-Day Bride, bizarre twisted tale of a hasty marriage, a secluded cottage, and a love triangle with a deadly end. No, but a great case for us. No one want a hasty marriage. No one want any of those things. A hasty marriage, bad. Secluded cottage? A combination of these three things together is the amalgam you don't want. Bad brew. Let's hear about the bad brew. On the evening on May 20th, 1947, body of 22-year-old Christina Kettlewell was found 150 feet from her honeymoon cottage in just 9 inches of water on the banks of a river in Severn Falls, Ontario. But before we get into the details of her death, let's dissect the circumstances that would lead to the discovery of Christina's body in the river. Christina Mocon lived in Mimico, Ontario, and worked at a bank where she was described as a capable employee. On May 12, 1947, Christina eloped with John Ray Kettlewell, a 26-year-old war veteran, better known as Jack, after knowing each other for 3 years. Christina's family had a concern about the marriage. Ronald Barry, a 28-year-old immigrant from Italy, was Jack's best friend and a professional ballroom dancer. It's said that Jack, Christina, and Ronald spent an inordinate amount of time together. Christina's sister, Helen, would comment that the family thought that perhaps Ronald was in love with Christina. So this is the classic case of two people in a relationship, but then there's this best friend who third wheels quite a bit. The Kettlewells spent the next few days at an apartment in Toronto on Tyndall Avenue. Bizarrely, Ronald joined them for the entirety of their honeymoon. And on May 17th, trio headed out to Ronald's remote cottage in Severn Falls, only accessible by boat. Now, bringing your best friend along to your honeymoon is an odd choice. That's a little strange because the honeymoon, I've heard, is for sex. Yeah, it's for the sexy time. During their time at the cottage, it's reported that Christina began to act out of character. She would go into crying fits while, at other times, seemed completely dazed. Evidence suggests that Christina had conversations with Ronald about whether or not Jack truly loved her. On May 20th, Christina disappeared from the cottage, curiously on the same day that Ronald's cottage mysteriously caught fire. Ronald returned to the cabin to find a disoriented Jack sitting in the cabin with an apparent head injury and pulled him out of the blaze. He looked for Christina, but didn't find her anywhere in the cottage. Ronald recalled that the cottage burned to the ground in just an hour. He took Jack on a boat to Severn Falls to reach a car, drive him to the hospital, contacted the police. It was then that Ronald discovered that the situation became even worse. That evening, Christina's body was found in 9 inches of water just 150 feet away from the cottage by Neville Sweet, an owner of a boathouse in the area. Her body was free from burns or any signs of violence. An official autopsy found traces of codeine in her stomach, but her ultimate cause of death was declared a drowning. Interesting, Major Lawrence Scarterfield, who tried to help put out the fire in the cottage, said he saw no signs of Christina's body in the area when he went to fetch water from the river to help with the flames just hours earlier. That's interesting. Jack, Ronald, and 20 other people were questioned by police in connection with the case. Jack was interrogated by the police for 3 hours after being released from the hospital, where he was treated for burns, shock, a head injury, and apparent drugging. Seems odd to drug yourself. However, Jack claimed to not remember anything that occurred after 11 a.m. on the day of Christina's death. Ronald was questioned by the police for a grueling 13 hours, in which he provided a 3,000-word statement that the police would describe as fantastic. On June 19th, an inquest into Christina's death began, which became quite the spectacle. The public packed not only the courtroom, but the grounds outside, with some even approaching Jack and Ronald. The main witnesses were autographed. It should be noted that Jack and Ronald were not on trial for murder. This was simply a case to determine whether or not foul play had been involved in Christina's death. While the highly sensationalized investigation uncovered many interesting bits of information, the jury of the inquest ultimately could not agree on whether Christina's death was the result of foul play or not, stating, due to the fact that the post-mortem examination disclosed codeine in the stomach of the deceased, and due to the suspicious fact that she was found drowned, this jury is unable to decide on the evidence given whether or not foul means were employed in her death. Jack and Ronald were in the clear, as there was no evidence implicating either of them in the death. But their relationships to both Christina and each other were thoroughly exposed in the process. The police report claims that there were signs and evidence that Christina was very distressed by the unnatural conduct of her husband and Barry. Do you think everyone in town was also scratching their heads over? With the circumstances surrounding her death laid out, let's get into the theories of just how Christina died. The first theory suggests that Christina may have been dealing with mental illness and killed herself. The largest pieces of evidence that Christina may have killed herself are the several suicide notes written prior to her untimely end that were uncovered during the inquest. The first note, written on Easter Sunday before their engagement and about 5 weeks before the wedding, was addressed to Ronald. In it, she writes that she tried to poison herself and talks about the uncertainty of receiving a proposal from Jack. In it, she claims, "This will be the best way out, as I cannot bear to see another girl have him." Jack recalls Christina being sick that day, but claimed in his testimony that he was unaware of the suicide note. She wrote another suicide note at the end of April. This time, her intention, as detailed in the note, was to not only kill herself, but Jack as well. In this note, also addressed to Ronald, she wrote, "When you love someone, you really love him, and I know there is no one for me but Jack, and if I cannot have him, I do not intend anyone else to. I waited, as you might say, in the hope that Jack would ask me to marry him, but I now realize I am just a passing fancy." The last note was written the day before she died. It was addressed to a Mrs. Thomas, who owned a home in Mimico that Christina and Jack stayed in for a little bit. Once done, Christina asked Ronald to mail the letter for her. She writes, "Ronnie is in the boat outside somewhere. By the time he gets back, everything will be all over with. He must have been afraid something would happen, as he is staying an extra day to make sure we go back to Toronto with." Her saying, "He's on the boat or something somewhere, by the time he gets back it's all going to be done," which I guess you could interpret as many things. She could be talking about a pot roast or something, but I don't think she's talking about pot roast. You could interpret that letter however you want, even though there's 2 letters that precede it that state her intentions pretty clearly. All notes were confirmed by a handwriting expert to have been signed by Christina. Ronald held on to all the notes from Christina, but he never told Jack about them until the inquest. Strangely, Ronald was able to and chose to save the letters from his burning cottage. Okay, if Ronald is in fact innocent, he sees this burning house. It is a little weird that he thinks, "Oh, let's go find these letters and save them from the fire." I feel like he is so intertwined in their drama. He knows that getting those letters is going to help clear things up for everyone. I would guess he'd probably save Jack. At that point, I would hope I don't run into her, because if she just knocked him out, set the house on fire, I probably would be imagining the bride from the haunted mansion with a hatchet in her hand. Yeah. Furthermore, one newspaper reports that Christina may have been in the cottage when Ronald rescued Jack. In either his testimony or one of his 2 lengthy statements given to the police, Ronald claimed to have returned to the cottage after sunbathing and found Jack with blood on his face and clearly disoriented. However, in this description of the events, Ronald says that Christina was in the cottage too. When Ronald asked what happened to Jack, Christina did not reply and simply stood there with teary eyes. Ronald carried Jack out of the cottage. When he went back in for blankets, he saw Christina for the last time. He noted a strong scent of coal oil in the living room, and smoke began spilling out of the kitchen about 15 minutes later. Ronald could not find Christina when he returned for her, and he also noted that a weapon or anything that could have been used in Jack's injury was not to be found. This is a completely different account. Drastically different. I'd like to put it out there that the new version of events that is cataloged here, equally confusing. Yeah, it's just still strange. You gotta take the newspaper report with a grain of salt, especially because it does make us look at this case in a very different lens. While this seems to implicate Christina, it should be noted that this is different from every other telling of the story by Ronald. Crown Counsel C.P. Hope, the lawyer leading the inquest, called Ronald a liar of the most blatant kind, whose sinister figure permeates the whole of this tragedy, but whose purpose and design are shrouded in mystery. This brings us to the second theory, that perhaps Jack and Ronald were not so innocent. The first bit of evidence that suggests the duo may have planned this is a series of insurance policies purchased before Christina's death. Jack took out 2 separate life insurance policies on himself and Christina before the marriage. Each $5,000 Canadian policy contained a double indemnity clause, which would allow the beneficiary to collect twice the amount. The cause of death was accidental, a sum worth around $200,000 today. Strangely, Ronald was the beneficiary listed on both policies. Ronald had also taken out a $5,000 Canadian insurance policy on his cottage that would later mysteriously burn down, and named Jack as his beneficiary. It should be noted that Ronald had failed careers in both construction and insurance. Additionally, the inquest revealed that Jack had given his war gratuity, payment to Canadian servicemen when discharged, to Ronald, and that Jack had removed all of his family from his will for reasons unknown. That's interesting. So, they both file these insurance claims and list each other as the beneficiaries for a situation that seems very outlandish, that just somehow happens shortly after they file these policies. The beneficiary thing is a little fishy. Also, Christina's wedding ring became a suspicious detail in the inquest, as it was never recovered. Reports refer as to whether Ronald purchased the ring for Christina or if Jack borrowed the ring from a married friend. And the true price of the ring is also debated, ranging from $1,000 to $13,000. Nevertheless, it was never found after Christina's death. I mean, it sounded like she was having a rough weekend. It's totally possible. So she just took it off? She's out there by the docks. She takes that wedding ring off and just throws it where she was not sure about the marriage. She's obviously maybe about to do something horrible. Let's just chuck this ring out for solidarity. As they carried out this plan to gain some finance, and then they were like, let's take the ring too. You would think that ring would turn up eventually then, if you hawked it. Like at a pawn shop. That paints this in a whole new light for me. Jack's statement to the police after the fire was another fascinating exhibit entered into the inquest. In the statement, Jack states that he and Ronald had been in an intimate relationship for some time. However, in court, Jack claimed he was coerced to make that statement, as the police wanted to build that story in their report. The police commissioner did in fact touch on this relationship in the report of Christina's case. In it, he writes that the relationship between Jack and Ronald was, to put it mildly, to be unnatural. There was no evidence to prove this relationship, but it was highly suspected. In the inquest, Crown Counsel C.P. Hope didn't believe Jack was coerced and suggested that the two were actually lovers. Jack finally agreed to this after Hope hammered him with questions. The Toronto Star describes the questioning in an article from June 20th. When Kettlewell, after vigorous questioning, agreed with Mr. Hope's repeated suggestion, he and Ronald were male lovers, a fantastic triangle of twisted and thwarted emotions took shape. I will say that I, in a weird way, kind of feel bad for them if they didn't do it, because now not only are they being suspected of murder, but they're being outed, which is not cool. Now I wonder if they drove her to this. She's thinking that this is her idea. They're driving her to this, and they know her moves. He knew her moves for sure. Ronald did, because she wrote these letters to him. She's confiding in him, but he can also be reporting back to Jack. She's gonna try and burn the house down. She thinks I'm gonna leave and go, you know? So it's not like they murdered her, but they didn't stop her. Oh, what a tangled web we weave. Christina's sister, Helen, claimed Christina was drugged just prior to the wedding, and when she came to married, she just accepted it. Indeed, the police report states that there was a strong suspicion that Christina's state of mind was something other than normal for a while before her death. They believe that the mind-altering effects were a result of drugs or medication. It's unclear if Christina was self-administering these drugs, or if she was being drugged. Ellen also claimed that Christina appeared to fear both Jack and Ronald. The owner of a home that Ronald and Jack lived in together said that Christina had mentioned she was worried something bad may happen if Ronald went with them on their honeymoon. It appears Christina was right to be worried. Jack went on to marry another woman 3 years after the tragedy, and the two of them lived a short while in the same home he briefly shared with Christina. Jack started a family with her, but they separated in the late 60s. Do you think he was like, "This honeymoon's a lot better than my last one"? Jack never spoke of the incident or his first marriage. In fact, his son Richard and daughter-in-law Sharon only discovered this part of Jack's life after Sharon came across an article while doing family research at a library. Even though they uncovered the story while Jack was still alive, they never broached the topic with him before his death in 1998. As for Ronald, he moved to New York in 1956. Before he left, he gifted his Pekingese dog named Ling to Jack's son Richard, who was 2 years old at the time. And then, Ronald was never heard from again. Was Christina Kettlewell murdered by two of the closest people in her life, in a sinister plan to break a tragic love triangle and collect insurance money? Did the bride endure great internal strife to which she saw no end? Perhaps it was simply a freak accident that took a young life. In any case, it appears that the death of the 8-day bride will remain unsolved. That concludes the haunting story of the 8-day bride. Despite numerous investigations and countless questions, Christina Kettlewell's death remains a mystery to this day. Was she a victim of a deadly plot? Or did she see no way out of her troubled life? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. You believe in foul play? Or was this a tragic accident? If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe to World True Crime for more deep dives into the world's most baffling cases. Thanks for watching, and remember to stay curious and stay safe.